Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance, watching the stars through the main viewing screen. His ship had been patrolling the outer rim for 3 months now, checking on human colonies and making sure trade routes stayed safe. It was quiet work, but Jake liked it that way. Quiet meant no trouble. The piece ended when his communication officer turned around with a worried look on her face. "Captain, we're getting a priority message from Earth Command. It's marked urgent." Jake walked over to her station. "Put it on the main screen, Lieutenant Carter." The image that appeared made Jake's stomach drop. Admiral Brooks looked tired and angry at the same time. Behind him, Jake could see other high-ranking officers moving around quickly. Something big was happening. "Captain Morrison," the Admiral began, "you need to change course immediately. Set your heading for Nexus Prime in the Galactic Core. You have been chosen to represent humanity before the full Galactic Council." Jake felt his mouth go dry. The Galactic Council had never asked to speak with humans directly before. In the 50 years since first contact, they had always used other species as go-betweens. This was either very good news or very bad news. "What do they want, sir?" Jake asked. Admiral Brooks shook his head. "We don't know for sure. The message was short and not very friendly. They said humanity must answer for its recent actions in contested space. They gave us 10 days to get there." Dr. Lisa Hamilton, the ship's science officer and diplomatic expert, stepped forward. "Admiral, what contested space are they talking about? Our colonies are all in sectors that were unclaimed." "That's what we thought too, Doctor. But it seems some of the older species think differently. The Council message mentioned violations of territorial boundaries and disruption of established trade routes." Jake ran his hand through his hair. This was getting worse by the minute. "Sir, are we talking about a trial here? Are they planning to judge humanity?" "Unknown, Captain. But given the tone of their message, I'd say it's not going to be a friendly chat. You're our best diplomat in that sector, Morrison. Dr. Hamilton will help you prepare during the journey." The Admiral's image flickered as the transmission began to break up due to distance. "One more thing, Captain. Intelligence reports suggest that several major species have been increasing military patrols along human trade routes. Be careful out there." The screen went dark, leaving Jake staring at his own reflection. 10 days to reach Nexus Prime. 10 days to figure out what humanity had done wrong and how to fix it. Dr. Hamilton moved to stand beside him. "Captain, I need to be honest with you. In all my studies of galactic politics, the Council has only called full assemblies 5 times in recorded history. Each time, it resulted in major changes to how species interact in this galaxy." "What kind of changes?" Jake asked, though he was afraid he already knew the answer. "Trade restrictions, territorial limits, sometimes complete isolation of troublesome species. The last full assembly was 800 years ago when the Zephyr Collective tried to claim exclusive rights to a major hyperspace route. The Council restricted them to their home system for 2 centuries. Jake looked around his bridge. His crew was listening to every word, and he could see the worry on their faces. These were good people who had signed up to explore space and protect human interests. They didn't deserve to be caught up in galactic politics. "All right, people," Jake said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Change of plans. Navigation. Set course for Nexus Prime. Maximum safe speed. Engineering. I want our fusion drives running at peak efficiency. Communications. Send a message to all human colonies in this sector. Tell them to be extra careful and report anything unusual." As his crew began carrying out orders, Jake pulled Dr. Hamilton aside. "Lisa, I need you to tell me everything you know about the Galactic Council, how they think, how they make decisions, what they consider important." She nodded. "I'll pull up all our files on the member species. But Jake, there's something else you should know. Humans have a reputation out here." "What kind of reputation?" "We're seen as unpredictable. Most species take thousands of years to expand beyond their home systems. We did it in 50. Most species perfect their technology slowly over long periods. We make rapid improvements and move on to the next challenge. Jake frowned. That sounds like good things to me. To us, yes, but to species that have been doing things the same way for millions of years, rapid change looks dangerous. They don't understand how we can adapt so quickly. The ship's engines hummed louder as they increased speed toward the galactic core. Jake watched the star patterns shift as they entered hyperspace. Somewhere ahead of them was Nexus Prime, home to the most powerful political body in known space. "How many species are on the council?" Jake asked. "Over 200 voting members, plus another 1,000 observer species. The core members are the oldest and most powerful civilizations in the galaxy. Some of them were building starships when Earth was still covered in ice." Jake whistled softly. "And they want to judge humanity. It looks that way. But Jake, remember something. We wouldn't be here if we weren't important enough to worry about. Weak species don't get called before the full council." That was either comforting or terrifying. Jake couldn't decide which. He looked out at the swirling colors of hyperspace and wondered what his words might mean for every human alive. The journey to Nexus Prime would take 8 days. 8 days to prepare for the most important conversation in human history. The Galactic Council Chamber was the largest structure Jake had ever seen. The building rose from the surface of Nexus Prime like a metal mountain, its walls covered in symbols from hundreds of different species. Ships from across the galaxy filled the orbital space around the planet, their designs ranging from sleek human vessels to massive crystalline constructs that looked more like living organisms than machines. Jake stood at the entrance to the main assembly hall, trying not to look as nervous as he felt. Dr. Hamilton had spent the entire journey preparing him for this moment, but nothing could have readied him for the sheer scale of what lay ahead. The chamber itself was circular, with tiers of seating, rising up from a central platform where Jake would soon stand. Representatives from over 200 species filled the seats, their forms so varied that Jake's eyes had trouble processing them all at once. Some looked almost human, while others were so alien that he couldn't tell which end was their head. "Remember," Dr. Hamilton whispered beside him, "show respect, but don't show weakness. They respect strength and confidence." A tall, insect-like being approached them. Its 4 arms moved in complex patterns as it spoke through a translation device. "Human representative, I am Council Speaker Zeth Kalar. You will present yourself at the center platform when the session begins." Jake nodded. "I understand." The speaker's compound eyes studied him for a moment. "You are younger than I expected. Most species send their eldest and wisest to speak for them. Humans believe in sending the right person for the job, regardless of age," Jake replied. Something that might have been amusement flickered across the alien's features. "We shall see if you are indeed the right person." As they walked toward the central platform, Jake noticed that conversations throughout the chamber gradually stopped. Hundreds of alien eyes, sensor clusters, and energy fields focused on him. The weight of their attention was almost physical. Dr. Hamilton squeezed his shoulder. "I'll be in the observation area. You've got this, Jake." Jake stepped onto the platform alone. The chamber fell completely silent. Above him, a massive display. Screen showed his image to every delegate in the hall. He had never felt so small or so visible at the same time. Council Speaker Zeth Kalar took his position at a raised podium. His voice, amplified by the chamber's acoustic system, filled the space. "The full assembly of the Galactic Council is now in session. We are here to address the recent actions of the species known as humanity." A scroll of light appeared in the air above Jake's head, displaying text in dozens of different languages. Zeth Kalar began reading the charges. "Humanity stands accused of aggressive expansion into established territorial zones. In the past 10 standard years, human colonies have been established in 47 star systems, many of which border or overlap with territories claimed by council member species. Jake kept his face neutral, but inside he was confused. Every human colony had been established in unclaimed space, according to all the star charts they had access to. Furthermore, the speaker continued, humanity is charged with disruption of established trade routes through the introduction of competitive commercial practices that undermine traditional economic relationships between council species. More, confusion. Human traders had simply offered better prices and faster delivery than their competitors. Since when was good business a crime? Finally, humanity is accused of technological recklessness and the development of potentially dangerous innovations without proper oversight from established galactic authorities. That last charge made Jake angry. Human technology had saved lives and improved conditions on dozens of worlds. Their medical advances alone had helped several species overcome diseases that had plagued them for centuries. The speaker gestured to the assembled delegates. Representatives of affected species will now present their testimony. What followed was unlike anything Jake had expected. One by one, delegates from powerful alien civilizations stood to voice their complaints about humanity. But instead of formal legal arguments, many of their statements sounded more like personal insults. Ambassador Quill Thara of the Sage Communion was the first to speak. Her species looked like tall, graceful birds with silver feathers and 3 eyes. The humans are children playing with forces they do not understand. They have existed as a spacefaring species for merely 50 of their years, yet they behave as if they have the wisdom of ancients. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. Jake realized that this wasn't really a trial. It was something worse. It was a public humiliation. High Arbiter Morvex of the Silicon Courts rose next. His people were living machines made of metal and crystal. Our civilization has observed proper protocols of expansion for over 4 million years. Humans establish colonies with no regard for historical precedent or traditional territorial rights. They are crude and impatient. More agreements from the crowd. Jake began to understand what was really happening here. These ancient species weren't angry about human actions. They were angry about human success. Commander Veltar of the Void Hunters stood next. His species looked like armored reptiles with glowing red eyes. Human vessels are primitive constructs held together by desperation and luck. Yet somehow they outperform ships designed by species with millions of years of engineering experience. This is clearly evidence of reckless disregard for safety and proper procedure. The chamber erupted in what Jake assumed was laughter, though it sounded like a collection of screeches, hums, and mechanical noises. He was beginning to get angry, but he forced himself to stay calm. For the next 2 hours, representative after representative stood to mock humanity's youth, technology, methods, and achievements. They spoke of humans as if they were dangerous, animals that had somehow learned to build spaceships. Every success was dismissed as luck or accident. Every innovation was called reckless or primitive. Jake listened to it all, taking mental notes and trying to understand the real message being sent. These species had ruled the galaxy for millions of years. They had established the rules, controlled the trade routes, and decided which technologies were acceptable. Then humans had arrived and started succeeding without asking permission. The final speaker was Overlord Thane of the Conquest Fleet. His people were massive bear-like creatures with 4 arms and skin like armor plating. The rapid expansion of humanity across the galaxy is nothing more than the desperate flailing of a species that knows it cannot survive long-term competition with superior civilizations. They grab what they can while they can, knowing their primitive nature will eventually lead to their destruction. The chamber fell silent as Overlord Thane sat down. Every eye was on Jake now, waiting for his response. They expected him to be angry, defensive, emotional. They wanted him to prove their point about human primitiveness. Jake took a deep breath and stepped forward. It was time to show them what humans were really capable of. The mockery was far from over. As Jake stood on the platform, more delegates began requesting time to speak. What had started as formal charges was turning into an open festival of insults directed at humanity and everything they had accomplished. Ambassador Quilthera rose again, this time with a holographic display floating beside her. If the Council will permit, I would like to present evidence of human barbarism. The display lit up with images from Earth's history. Ancient battles, medieval wars, world wars with their terrible weapons. This species has spent most of its existence killing its own kind. Even now, human colonies sometimes have disputes that lead to violence. The delegates made sounds of disgust and disapproval. Jake wanted to point out that every species in the chamber had probably gone through similar phases in their development, but he held his tongue. Let them talk. He was learning more about their real concerns with every word. High Arbiter Morvex activated his own display system. The Silicon Courts have conducted a detailed analysis of human technological development. What we have found is deeply troubling. Charts and graphs filled the air above the chamber. Human technology advances at a rate that defies all established patterns of safe development. They went from basic chemical rockets to faster-than-light travel in less than 200 years. Several delegates expressed shock at this information, even though Jake knew most of them were already aware of human history. This was all theater, designed to make humanity look dangerous and reckless. To put this in perspective, Morvex continued, the average council species required between 10,000 and 50,000 years to achieve the same technological progress. The Crystalline Dominion, one of our most innovative member species, took 37,000 years to develop reliable interstellar travel after inventing basic rocketry. The chamber filled with buzzing, chirping, and humming as delegates discussed this among themselves. Jake caught fragments of translated conversations, most of them expressing amazement at human recklessness or predicting that such rapid advancement would surely lead to disaster. Commander Veltar stood again, his red eyes glowing brighter. The Void Hunters have had several encounters with human vessels in disputed space. I can personally testify to their primitive construction methods. His display showed detailed scans of human ships. Look at this fusion drive assembly. It's held together with metal bolts and welded joints. No elegant crystal matrices, no bio-neural integration, just crude mechanical connections. Laughter echoed through the chamber again. To Jake's ears, it sounded less like amusement and more like nervous energy. These species were working very hard to convince themselves that humans weren't a real threat. Yet somehow, Veltar continued, his voice carrying a note of confusion, these crude vessels consistently outperform ships of superior design. Human cargo haulers regularly beat our fastest courier ships on long-distance runs. Their patrol vessels have successfully defended colonies against raiders that our own forces failed to stop. The laughter died down at this admission. Jake noticed several delegates shifting uncomfortably in their seats. The truth was starting to leak through their carefully constructed narrative. A new speaker rose from the upper tiers. Jake didn't recognize the species, but they looked like walking trees with crystalline leaves that chimed when they moved. The translation device identified them as representing the Eternal Grove Collective. We have observed human agricultural methods on their colony worlds, the tree being said. They show complete disregard for established ecological wisdom. Instead of spending centuries studying planetary ecosystems before introducing crops, they simply plant Earth-origin food sources and somehow make them work. More murmurs of disapproval, but Jake detected something else in the crowd's reaction. These weren't the confident criticisms of superior beings. These were the complaints of competitors who couldn't understand why their proven methods were being outperformed by newcomers. Another delegate stood, this one from a species that looked like floating jellyfish made of light. The Luminous Accord has attempted to establish trade relationships with human colonies. Their negotiation methods are completely backwards. They present their terms clearly and directly, without proper ritual or ceremony. They seem to think that honest communication is more important than traditional diplomatic protocol. Jake almost smiled at that one. Yes, humans did tend to say what they meant instead of wrapping every statement in layers of ceremony and hidden meaning. Apparently, this was seen as a flaw. The complaints continued for another hour. Humans were too direct in their communication. They solved problems with simple solutions instead of complex, elegant ones. They adapted existing technologies instead of inventing completely new ones. They established colonies quickly instead of spending decades in careful planning. With each complaint, Jake began to see the real pattern. Every criticism boiled down to the same thing. Humans got results without following the established rules. They succeeded where older, supposedly, wiser species struggled. And most importantly, they did it all without asking permission from the established galactic order. Overlord Thane rose for a second time, his massive form dominating his section of the chamber. I believe we have heard enough evidence of human recklessness and primitive behavior, but I want to address something more serious. His voice carried a threatening tone that made several smaller species delegates shrink back in their seats. The rapid expansion of humanity represents a threat to galactic stability. They ignore established territorial agreements. They disrupt traditional trade relationships. They introduce dangerous technologies without proper testing. Most seriously, they give other young species ideas about challenging the natural order. This last statement sent a chill through the chamber. Jake realized they had reached the heart of the matter. The council wasn't really concerned about human actions. They were afraid of human example. If we allow humanity to continue their reckless expansion unchecked, Thane continued, other species will begin to think they can ignore council authority as well. The stability that has maintained peace in this galaxy for millions of years could collapse. The chamber erupted in discussions as delegates considered this argument. Jake could see heads nodding and energy fields pulsing in agreement throughout the hall. They had found their justification for whatever they planned to do to humanity. Council Speaker Zethkalar raised one of his 4 arms for silence. The testimony phase is now complete. It is time for the human representative to respond to these charges. His compound eyes fixed on Jake. Human, you have heard the concerns of the galactic community. How do you answer? Jake stepped forward to the speaking platform. The chamber fell silent, every delegate leaning forward to hear his response. They expected anger, defensiveness, desperate pleading. They wanted him to prove their point about human emotional instability. Instead, Jake took a slow breath and began to speak in a calm, measured voice that carried clearly through the vast chamber. Jake stepped onto the speaking platform and looked around the massive chamber. 200 species watched him, waiting for the emotional outburst they expected from a primitive human. Instead, Jake's voice was calm and clear when he began to speak. Honored representatives of the Galactic Council, he said, his words carrying to every corner of the vast chamber. I have listened carefully to your concerns about humanity. You have called us young, primitive, reckless, and dangerous. You have mocked our technology, our methods, and our achievements. And you know what? You're absolutely right about some of those things. A ripple of surprise went through the chamber. This wasn't the defensive response they had expected. We are young, Jake continued. 50 years ago, humans had never traveled between stars. 100 years ago, we couldn't even fly. 200 years ago, we thought our planet was the center of the universe. You're right to call us young. He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. But I want you to think about what that really means. In 50 years, we went from one planet to 47 colonies. In 50 years, we built a space fleet, established trade routes, and learned to work with dozens of alien species. Jake pulled out his data pad, the simple human device looking crude compared to the advanced technology around him. High Arbiter Morvex, Your own records showed that the silicon quartz took 37,000 years to achieve reliable interstellar travel. The crystalline dominion needed 50,000 years to establish their first 50 colonies. He looked directly at the delegates as he spoke. You call us primitive, and our technology does look simple compared to yours. But this basic device in my hand has more computing power than the first spacecraft your species built. We didn't spend millennia perfecting crystal matrices or bio-neural networks. We built what worked, improved it quickly, and moved on to the next challenge. Commander Veltar shifted uncomfortably in his seat as Jake addressed his earlier comments. Commander, you mocked our fusion drives for being held together with metal bolts and welded joints. You're right, they're not elegant, but those crude drives have never failed to get our ships where they need to go. How many of your elegant vessels are currently in repair bays because their sophisticated systems developed unexpected problems? Several delegates looked toward Veltar, who remained silent. Jake had hit a nerve. Ambassador Quill Thera showed you images of human conflict from our history. Yes, we fought wars. Yes, we made mistakes. But every species in this chamber went through similar phases. The difference is that we learned from our conflicts and grew beyond them in centuries instead of millennia. Jake walked slowly around the platform as he spoke, making eye contact with delegates throughout the chamber. You complain that we ignore traditional territorial agreements. But who made those agreements? When were humans consulted about how space should be divided up? We established our colonies in sectors that your own charts listed as unclaimed. The chamber was completely quiet now. Even the usual background hum of translation devices had stopped, as every delegate focused on Jake's words. You say we disrupt traditional trade relationships. Yes, we do. We offer better prices, faster delivery, and more reliable service. We compete honestly and openly instead of relying on ancient monopolies to protect our profits. Jake stopped walking and faced the center of the chamber. But here's what really bothers you. It's not that we're primitive or reckless. It's that we're succeeding without following your rules. We're proving that there are other ways to do things. High Arbiter Morvex activated his speakers. Human, you speak as if rapid advancement is always beneficial. But uncontrolled technological development leads to disaster. We have seen species destroy themselves with weapons they created too quickly. Jake nodded. You're right. Rapid advancement can be dangerous. But controlled advancement can be too slow to help people who need it now. How many beings died of diseases while your species spent centuries carefully testing cures? How many worlds went hungry while you debated the proper way to improve crop yields? A new delegate stood up, one Jake hadn't heard from before. The being looked like a collection of floating metal spheres held together by energy fields. The Consensus Collective has observed human problem-solving methods. You approach challenges with insufficient data and make decisions based on incomplete information. This is clearly inefficient. You're absolutely right, Jake replied. We don't wait until we have perfect information before we act. We gather what data we can, make the best decision possible, and adjust our approach as we learn more. Sometimes we make mistakes, but while you're still studying the problem, we're already working on solutions. The floating spheres pulsed with different colors as the delegate processed this response. Jake could see that his words were having an effect throughout the chamber. The confident mockery from earlier was being replaced by something that looked more like uncertainty. Overlord Thane, Jake said, addressing the massive bear-like being directly. You called our expansion the desperate flailing of a species that knows it cannot survive long-term competition. But look at the results. Our colonies are thriving, our trade networks are growing, our technology continues to improve. Jake's voice grew stronger, though it never rose to anger. You say we can't survive competition with superior civilizations, but we're not just surviving, we're succeeding. And that's what really scares you. The chamber erupted in shocked buzzing and chirping. No one had ever spoken to the council this directly before. But Jake wasn't finished. You've had millions of years to perfect your civilizations. You've established comfortable positions at the top of galactic society. You've created rules and systems that favor your way of doing things. And then humans came along and started succeeding without asking for your permission. Jake looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes or sensors or energy fields of as many delegates as he could. You call us chaotic and unpredictable, but chaos is just another word for adaptability. You call us violent and aggressive, but sometimes force is the only way to protect what matters. He paused for a moment, letting the tension build. You want to know what makes humans different? We're not afraid to fail. We're not afraid to try new approaches. We're not afraid to compete with civilizations that are millions of years older than us. The silence in the chamber was complete now. Jake had their full attention, and he could see that his words were hitting their target. These ancient species had grown comfortable in their established positions. They had forgotten what it felt like to struggle, to grow, to push beyond their limits. You can try to confine us to our home system, Jake said, his voice carrying clearly through the vast space. You can try to force us to follow your ancient rules. But remember this, in the time it's taken for this council session to meet, scientists have made discoveries that some of your species haven't achieved in centuries. Jake walked back to the center of the platform. We didn't come here to ask for permission to exist among the stars. We came to tell you that we're already here, and we're not going anywhere. The silence that followed Jake's words was unlike anything the Galactic Council chamber had ever experienced. For the first time in recorded history, no delegate immediately responded to a speaker's statement. The weight of Jake's logical arguments hung in the air like an inescapable truth that no one wanted to acknowledge. Jake stood calmly on the platform, watching the faces and forms of 200 different species as they processed what he had said. Some delegates were conferring quietly with their advisors. Others sat motionless, their attention focused inward as they considered the implications of his words. A few were looking at data displays, apparently checking facts that Jake had mentioned. Council Speaker Zeth Kalar was the first to break the silence, but his usual commanding tone was noticeably subdued. The human representative has made several claims about comparative technological and social development rates. Are these assertions accurate? High Arbiter Morvex's crystalline form flickered as he accessed his database. After a long moment, he spoke reluctantly. The basic facts are correct. Human technological advancement has proceeded at rates significantly higher than galactic norms. Their expansion timeline is also accurate according to our records. Another delegate stood up. Jake recognized her as Ambassador Quilthara, but her previous confidence had been replaced by visible uncertainty. If the human claims are true, then we must ask ourselves a difficult question. Why have we, with millions of years of experience, been unable to match the achievements of such a young species? The chamber erupted in uncomfortable buzzing and chittering. This was clearly not a question most delegates wanted to consider publicly. Commander Veltar rose slowly from his seat. The Void Hunters have been monitoring human naval development for the past decade. Their vessels do indeed outperform many of our designs despite their apparent simplicity. He paused, as if the words were difficult to say. Our engineering teams have been unable to explain how they achieve such efficiency with such basic technology. Jake watched as the mood in the chamber shifted. The confident superiority that had filled the room hours earlier was evaporating as delegates were forced to confront facts they had been trying to ignore. A new voice spoke from the upper tiers. The delegate was from a species Jake hadn't seen before, looking like a cluster of flowing water held in a roughly humanoid shape. The tidal consciousness has studied human colony development patterns. We must admit that their success rate is remarkably high. Of their 47 established colonies, 46 are thriving. Only one has encountered serious difficulties, and even that world is recovering. more uncomfortable stirring throughout the chamber. Jake could see that many delegates were beginning to realize they had based their arguments on assumptions rather than facts. Overlord Thane stood again, his massive form still intimidating despite the changing atmosphere. Numbers and statistics do not tell the whole story. Rapid advancement often leads to instability and eventual collapse. Human success may be temporary. Jake stepped forward to respond. Overlord Thane, you may be right. Rapid change does create risks, but so does staying the same for too long. How many of your species have made major technological breakthroughs in the past 1,000 years? How many have established new colonies or opened new trade routes? The silence stretched out again as delegates considered this question. Jake pressed his advantage. The Council speaks of stability and tradition as if they were always good things. But stability can become stagnation. Tradition can become a prison that prevents growth and improvement. He looked around the chamber as he spoke. You've accused humans of being dangerous because we change quickly and adapt to new situations. But maybe the real danger is in refusing to change at all. Dr. Hamilton had briefed Jake on the Council's history during their journey to Nexus Prime. He decided to use some of that information now. This council was formed over 2 million years ago to promote cooperation and prevent conflicts between species. In all that time, how many new species have been invited to join as full members? How many times have the fundamental rules been updated to reflect new realities? Council Speaker Zethkalar's compound eyes fixed on Jake. Change for its own sake is not wisdom, human. The systems we have developed have maintained peace and prosperity across the galaxy. Have they? Jake asked. Or have they just maintained the status quo? How many species are still waiting for permission to expand beyond their home systems? How many worlds could be helped by technologies that exist but haven't been approved for use? Jake pulled up a file on his data pad. According to your own records, there are over 50 species that have applied for territorial expansion rights in the past century. How many of those applications have been approved? Zethkalar was quiet for a long moment. 7, he finally admitted. 7 out of 50, Jake repeated. Meanwhile, humans have established 47 colonies in 50 years without asking anyone's permission. Which approach is actually serving the needs of galactic civilization? A delegate from the back of the chamber stood up. Jake couldn't identify the species, but they spoke with a voice like grinding stone. The human makes a compelling point. The Granite Confederacy has been waiting for expansion approval for over 3 centuries. Our population has grown beyond our current territorial capacity. Other voices began joining in. The Coral Collective has been seeking trade route access for decades. The Wind Dancers have requested technology-sharing agreements that have been under review for 200 years. The Silver Chorus has proposed colony sites that remain unapproved after half a millennium. Jake realized that his words had opened a floodgate. Species throughout the chamber were beginning to voice frustrations that had apparently been building for centuries or millennia. Council Speaker Zethkalar raised all 4 of his arms for silence. Order! We are not here to debate council procedures. We are here to address human violations of established protocols. Jake seized the moment. But that's exactly the point, Speaker Zethkalar. We're being accused of violating protocols that prevent other species from achieving their goals. Maybe the problem isn't with humanity. Maybe the problem is with the protocols themselves. The chamber fell silent again, but this time it was a different kind of silence. Jake could see delegates throughout the hall looking at each other with new understanding. His words had connected dots that many had been afraid to connect on their own. The choice before this council is simple, Jake continued. You can try to force humanity back into the box of traditional limitations. You can insist that we follow the same slow, careful procedures that have governed galactic development for millions of years. He paused, making sure he had everyone's attention. Or you can ask yourselves why those procedures exist in the first place. Are they really designed to promote the welfare of all species, or are they designed to protect the advantages of the species that created them? Council Speaker Zethkalar looked around the chamber, seeing the faces of delegates who were clearly questioning things they had never questioned before. The confident assembly that had gathered to discipline humanity had become something else entirely. "This session is adjourned," Zethkalar announced, his voice lacking its earlier authority. "The council will reconvene tomorrow to consider all that has been discussed." As delegates began filing out of the chamber, Jake noticed that many were gathering in small groups engaged in intense conversations. The galaxy's most powerful political body had been forced to confront uncomfortable truths about itself, and the effects of that confrontation were just beginning. Jake walked off the platform knowing that regardless of what the council decided, tomorrow the galaxy had changed. One human's words had broken the silence that had surrounded difficult questions for millennia, and silence once broken is very hard to restore.